Counselor Accents Podcast. Two school counselors who love their jobs. Oh, and they happen to have Southern accents too. Bless their hearts.
I'm Kim Crumbly.
I'm Laura Rancorn.
And together we are Counselor Accents. And Laura, we have a very important guest today.
I would like to tell you about her, and I just want you to sit back, grab a Coke, get comfortable, because her accolades, or I think you call them acclimates, her accolades are, it's like a mile long. So here we go. So our guest today is Karen Gross, and she's based in Washington, D.C., and she's an author and an educator and an advisor to nonprofit schools, organizations, and governments. And she focuses on trauma, as you will hear in our podcast. But it's the whole picture of trauma. So she's written a book called, and I love this, and just listen to the title of this book, Trauma Doesn't Stop at the School Door. Strategies and Solutions for Educators Pre-K through College. Is that not just the best title for a book about trauma?
It really is. And she puts the meat behind that title. There's a lot of knowledge that she has.
She also wrote Breakaway Learners, Strategies for Post-Secondary Success, which I think is such an overlooked topic, and Failure and Forgiveness, Rebalancing the Bankruptcy System. She's also written a trauma-sensitive children's book series called Lady Lucy's Quest. Is that not, and I'm not even done yet. I'm not even done. She's on the senior council to Finn Partners. She's an instructor in continuing education at Rutgers University, Graduate School of Social Work. She's on the advisory council at the Center for the Minority Serving Institutions at Rutgers. Listen to this, Kim. She was the senior policy advisor to the U.S. Department of Education during the Obama administration. So it's basically like we're talking with a former president.
Okay, that's a stretch, but and this is what you just said. You said, Kim, like you were not from Alabama, but from another state.
Don't you dare. How dare you?
Oh, so yes, how we roped her is beyond me.
I don't know, but
buckle up, you're in for a treat.
Yes.
Are you done with the accolades?
I left some things out, but
those are some.
I wanted to. We have to eat lunch at some point, so.
So I'm excited, and let's get started with a very important topic. So we are so excited to have Karen Gross with us today. This is a topic that is near and dear to our hearts, but I feel like I don't know enough about this. Even as school counselors, we're not therapists, but in education, this is where we're all having to delve in and learn more about trauma. So Karen, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you've done?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And it's nice to be here with you and your listeners. Most of my work, I'm an author and educator, and most of my work is around student success. And prior to the pandemic, a lot of my time was spent going to institutions that had experienced some horrific event, a school shooting, a concert shooting, immigration detention, something terrible, or an anniversary of an event. And with the pandemic and the release of a new book, I started focusing on the ways that trauma was impacting student learning and student psychosocial development. And to move that forward, while I've worked with teachers and students and school systems and organizations since the start of the pandemic, one of my concerns right now is the restarting of school in the fall of 2021. And what concerns me is that much of the attention has been paid on the physical well-being of the student and the teacher and the others in that building. And I appreciate that. I'm not downplaying physical safety at all. But sadly, while the focus has been on physical well-being, we haven't paid nearly enough attention to the psychological well-being, the psychological wellness of our students and our educators. And so my work has been to help schools now prepare for the opening of school so that they're ready to do it in a way that's trauma responsive and provides the best opportunity for students and educators to effectively move into the next phase. So that's the work I do, and I'm happy to share about it with you.
Well, you've already got our brain going. Kim, you're muted. So I see you talking.
I am. I'm actually in school right now, Karen, as is Laura. And so when things come, you've been in schools enough. If there's noises or whatever, I might be muted. But I said, is that all? I mean, my goodness, absolutely, we got our brains going. And when you talk about, I think that's that this is going to happen, that we're moving forward, and how do we do this effectively, and anything that we could glean from someone to help us in education do this. We need anything that we can get to help us with this.
All right, so let me start with two conclusions. And I've recently started with conclusions because I've realized that people are Zoom fatigued and COVID fatigued, and listening to a whole podcast may not work. So I now put my conclusions towards the front. So here they are. The first thing we need to do is what I call the 3 Ps, as in the letter P: plan, prepare, and predict now, starting now, in anticipation of a reopening in August or September. And the theory behind that conclusion is that schools are not light switches. You can't just turn them on and turn them off, although we did turn them off that way. The idea here is that you've got to plan, prepare, and then anticipate based on your own school, your own culture, your own experiences within your community over the last 18 months, what is likely to happen. So that's my first conclusion. My second conclusion has to do with what trauma takes away and reinstituting it in any, all, and every way. And that is connection and reciprocity. It is by far the most significant thing to do. So what our brains are wired, literally wired for connection, and we've spent the last 18 months with trauma disrupting that connectivity. Mm-hmm. And that's connectivity that's been exacerbated by masks and social distancing. And we know that if you can connect and engage between a student and an adult who's outside the family, who genuinely cares about you, you have a better chance of helping that student learn and develop psychosocially. So anything we can do to create connections, student to student, student to educator, educator to student, is absolutely essential. Now, there are lots of ways to do it, but if you have in the back of your mind connection, connectivity, then that's a pathway forward. And school counselors, whom I include within the definition of educators, but school counselors have an added opportunity to create connection and engagement by the very nature of the way that they participate with students, with educators, with parents, in classes, in their own offices. So those are the two conclusions that I would leave you with. And let me just share a little exercise that you can even just think about. So most of my work is grounded in the trenches experiences. There are things I've done with teachers, with students. I continue to teach, starting at K all the way through adult education, so that I can make sure that the strategies are ones that actually work. They're theoretically grounded, to be sure, in the nature of trauma, but also I want to make sure they work in real life with real people. Okay, so this is a pack of colorful, I hope you can see them, paper clips. Okay, so these can be used in a variety of ways. So if one gave each returning student and educator one of these, the first thing they could do is connect the paper clips to each other. That in and of itself is a connection activity. It's the start of opening the neural pathways towards connection. Then you can connect and create 6 feet, which is, or 3 feet, depending on where you are, which is the distance between students and educators. And then, once each student has done that, you can connect all the pieces and create one enormous connected hoop around a room. And then for younger kids, you can use it as the way you walk in the hallway by using your connection. And you can fiddle with it in between, so you can get your sensory motion going, which lowers the response of your autonomic nervous system, which is part of the problem here anyway, that people's autonomic nervous systems are on high alert. So just one box of paper clips can go a long way in thinking through how to create connections. And by the way, if you use colorful ones, you can ask students, so did you put all the blues together? Did you put all the greens together? Did you put all the pink ones together? And then you can ask something like, do you feel like which color today? Do you feel blue? If you feel blue, what does that feel like? If you feel red, what does that mean? So the colors are an added activity to get at people to identify feelings. So let me just add this. As important as learning and content are, and I'm an academic by nature, the initial focus upon returning to school should not be pouring content into heads and trying to catch students up from where they left off, lost off from all the types of learning that they engaged in during the pandemic. And so, for me, the best thing you can do is get students ready, willing, and able to engage. Get them ready to learn content. That will come, but if you try it in the beginning, it's likely lost and will alienate many students. So just because they're back doesn't mean they're ready, willing, and able to learn. It means they're back, period. So their presence isn't synonymous with readiness to learn. So the goal in the beginning of restarting schools is really readiness to learn, whether you're a starting kindergartner, or you're in 3rd grade, or you're in 6th grade, or you're in high school, or you're ready to graduate. It's the same question. And by the way, for kids undergoing transitions, like coming into kindergarten, or going into middle school, or going into high school, or going out of high school, those are particular age groups that are really vulnerable to not being, we're not so good at transitions, generally speaking, and we're surely not so good at them in schools. We have to be more focused, laser focused on the students experiencing transitions. So just one box of paper clips is a good start.
We love rubber meets the road ideas that we can implement. That is certainly something that we can do easily with our students. That makes such a great point. So I appreciate you sharing that with us. And I just want to take a minute, Kim, and give her a standing ovation right here in the middle of our conversation, because this hits at the heart of school counselors. I mean, I feel like you have given us a torch that now we need to run with. You have commissioned school counselors that we are kind of that connectivity liaison between students and educators. This is our wheelhouse. And so I appreciate you giving us that commission.
And Laura, the ready, willing, and able to learn, I appreciate that so much. And for those of us who did come back,
Yeah,
because there are counselors who are listening who in school systems that went back in August. And I wonder, so we have seen that almost dazed feeling that we all experience, and it's hard to learn when you are in that trauma brain, and so I'm wondering if educators are learning from one another on those school systems that did go back and what they have picked up and learned. And I also wonder if it will be easier for us who are already back to come back next year, or if I would almost feel like it would be harder for those who've had that extended time away to come back, because the longer you're away, I feel like maybe it would be more traumatic to come back. Do you have any thoughts on that, or does that even make sense?
Well, there are multiple questions embedded in there.
There was a lot.
So let me see if I can answer some of them. I think we have to start with the realization that whether you've spent the past year hybrid, online, or in person, the start of the new school year in August or September is not the same as starting any other school year. And I think we have to acknowledge that. Whatever happened before then, this is not like, oh, where were we before we were so rudely interrupted, and let's just pick up and go. I think there has to be a recognition that this is different. And the idea, by the way, of returning to, quote, normal doesn't exist, because trauma never gets erased. You can ameliorate it, for sure. And we have many strategies for doing that. But the idea that we can just sort of eliminate, erase, do away with what happened and start back as if we were just, oh, well, those last 18 months with the pandemic, oh, well, like, move on. No, we have to process what happened. And as counselors, you all know that if you don't process, it stays with you. And trauma does stay with you. And by the way, trauma is catching. Students can transmit trauma to their teachers, to their counselors. It's called secondary trauma and vicarious trauma. So let me give you an analogy for how to think about this. If you think about trauma as an invisible backpack that we all carry, students carry that backpack with them as they progress along the educational pipeline. And the further along they go and encounter other bad things that happen along the way, that trauma gets re-triggered and that backpack keeps growing. And so the size of your backpack may differ from child to child, but it keeps growing as you move forward in time. Now, one of the tools we use often when students go back to school is we get them a new backpack. That's for younger kids and older kids. And that's, we put in crayons and we put in paper and we put in scissors and glue sticks and whatever else. I think this time we have to put in a trauma responsive bag. Now, we don't have to call it that because the word trauma sets people off. Call it a sensory play kit, or call it some sort of activity set. And what this little sack in the backpack is designed to do is to activate your 5 senses plus intuition and balance, which are critical sensory activities, and put them in a bag so that when students struggle, their educator can say to them, hey, pull out that sensory kit and go play with it. Or, oh, all of us seem to be a little itchy right now. Let's pull out our trauma sensitive kits and play with it. So I've written about what can be in these trauma sensitive kits, and they can be very small and fit in a backpack, small enough that kids could bring them home, put them on their bedside table. Parents could learn that if kids are dysregulated or disassociated or overregulated, they could give them this as a way of mediating whatever it is that the student is feeling. And there are a number of things that one can put in there, but the key is to activate all of the senses. So there has to be something visually interesting, a 3D picture, some sort of capacity to draw with a crayon. There has to be something scented, whether it's a pine cone or some other way you can give a scent through wax or something. There has to be something kinesthetic, Play-Doh, little cans of Play-Doh, or things one can hook together. There has to be an instrument or something that makes noise so that you activate the auditory system. I suggest something you can taste. A lifesaver is a good one because of the double meaning of the word lifesaver. And then one can get at balance by balancing the bag in your non-dominant hand, balancing an object in there. So there are lots of things that one can put in there. I'll tell you what I put in virtually all of mine, which can you
Yeah.
can you see? It's a little ceramic stone that says hope. Now, there are stones that have all sorts of inspirational words. I use hope, and here's why. And it's actually a story that kids can understand, but so can educators. Okay, so one way to think about what happened over the last year is sort of like Pandora and her box. The box opened and out flew like a host of horrible things, of which illness and death were but one. We had ethnic and racial discrimination. We had a raid on the Capitol. We had vituperative engagement between people. We had discrimination. We had shootings. We had natural events, floods, fires. I mean, lots of things poured out of the box. But in the original myth, the original Pandora's myth, there is one thing that never left her box, and that's hope. Hope stayed in her box. And most people forget that part of the story. And so I think it's important to remember that as difficult as all of this is, it's possible to have hope. And if we introduce trauma responsive strategies, we can have even more hope that we will be able to move from where we are to a better new place with new traditions and new ways of engaging and increased empathy and capacity. But you got to hold on to hope. So I literally hold on to hope. It sits in my pocket. And if I encounter someone in a school who's struggling, I give them hope.
Oh, I love it.
So, you know, if you keep a bowl filled with these so that people can get them, which gets me to another strategy for you all to consider. We think of this framework: name it, tame it, and frame it. So if you can name what's happening, whether it's trauma or your feelings, then you can tame them. You can't tame them if you can't name them. So you name it, tame it, and then frame it is in two senses. One is a frame as in what you put up on the wall, which makes something front and center and recognizes its importance. And the other is framing as in creating an architecture, a systemic way of holding up trauma responsiveness and our taming strategies. A structure, a frame, like you have for a house. You frame a house. And so almost everything I do hinges on this name, tame, and frame architecture as a way of helping people name, then tame, and then frame.
So practical.
Yeah.
So such great practical ideas, and we love that. I think we're all looking for practical things that help us as educators. And that's another thing. Not only are the students stressed, but we're dealing with teachers who are have more trauma than we've ever had. So it's not like I'm in a high poverty area, and so my students, it's amazing things that happen. I mean, just some horrible things have happened here with students and their families, just because of the nature of where we are. And then you've added this on top of it, and it almost feels like it. How do we gain control of this?
So here's one really important thing to realize, and this comes up in the context of punishment. And by the way, we haven't even gotten to my questions that institutions should be asking themselves, but this seems to be helpful to you, so I'm happy to keep giving you concrete strategies. Trauma isn't something you ask for, any more than you ask to be born into the family you're born in or the country you're born in. Trauma is something that happened to you. And so it's not intent-based. So when kids act out and it's based on trauma, it's not like they're intending to be difficult. Whether they're dysregulated or disassociated or overregulated, which is the triptych of trauma symptomology, it's not like they're setting out to do that. And the best way for me to explain that, which actually students of all ages understand. So it's very different than the kid who knowingly and intentionally goes up and hits someone or defies a teacher. They may do those things, but most of them are symptoms of something else. And the answer isn't to punish them by sending them out of the room. The lack of connection is the whole problem in the first place. So don't send them out, send them in and help them process, even if you have to bring a counselor into the classroom or another trained person to help them. So our whole approach to how we deal with student behavior has to change now, because what we used to do was intent-based, and what's happening now is most assuredly not intent-based. And that means we need to change how we think about our students, engage with our students, and handle when they act out. So let me give you one strategy, concrete strategy, that may help with this, to help both educators, counselors, and students explain what's happening when students aren't with them there, right? So engaging the disengaged student has become a common nomenclature for what we're trying to do, providing strategies for educators so that they can deal with their own trauma, so you can't pour from an empty cup, and then strategies that are basically trauma-responsive pedagogy. We're working on all of those. But here's an example. Okay, so take your arm like this. Do it with me. Okay, and then put your thumb inside here and create a fist. Okay, so this is your brain. This is your brain stem. This is your cognition here. And inside your thumb is your limbic system. And when everything is working, right, the cognition is what's the overarching part, and feelings are happening along in there. But when you've been traumatized, what actually activates is the primitive brain, the reptilian brain, the base of the brain, which is where the autonomic nervous system is housed. And that's what trips off the 5 F's: fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and faint. And when those kick in, here's what happens to your brain. It literally flips out. So when a kid says, I'm flipped out, they actually are flipped out. They're describing exactly what's happening in their head. And our job is to calm the primitive brain so that the limbic system and the cognition can come back. So if you just say to a kid who knows this, oops, you're flipped out, let's find a way to get you back, that's a really useful way of understanding it. Kids can self-express that way. Oh, shoot, I'm flipped out. Now, it's a little more complicated because feelings can hijack cognition. So that would be when you have cognition, but the feelings, step on the cognition. So ultimately, your feelings can override cognition and you want them to work together. So the idea is to move the feelings inside, not hiding them. It's to make them coordinated with the cognition. But this example is actually a really useful one for people to understand what's going on when trauma occurs.
That is so helpful. I can see starting our year that way with a lesson about that and just setting the tone and just making that sort of the language of the school between educators, between students. That's incredibly helpful. So thank you for that. I want to move on.
Into these. Let's get into these questions.
I do have one question, if I may, since you have hogged the question stick, Kim, the whole time. So I do have one question that I'd like to get your advice on. I want to go back to a statement that you made where you said the goal is readiness to learn, and you may be covering this with the next thing that you want to talk about. But teachers do have their stress when it comes to the standards that they have to meet and state testing and things like that. So how do you set the stage as a counselor that our goal is readiness to learn above academics, above all else?
So I actually just wrote a piece about our being too content focused and not psychosocially ready focused. And this is one where I think you need administrative understanding and buy-in. And if I have one regret about the work that I've done over the last 18 months, is that I really should have done more with administrators. Because at the end of the day, trauma responsiveness happens at both the micro and the macro level. It happens in classrooms, it happens in offices, it happens in engagements between people. But at the macro level, you need a change in culture. And that change in culture generally comes from the top and the messaging that comes down. And so I think educators who are administrators, need to be saying, it doesn't make sense to test now. And by the way, many of them are saying, well, let's just test and not look at the results or use the results. But testing is really stressful for kids. So my
and adults, we're doing it right now.
So my own view is don't do it. I mean, and now you need your state to buy in, and you need your unions, and you need your heads of schools and your superintendents to buy in. But the point is that testing actually isn't measuring much right now except failure. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we need a measure of that, right? We know people are struggling.
Gosh. Yeah.
So why not focus instead on creating an environment in which kids can be readied to learn? And by the way, that is education too. And so here's a phrase you can use. You can take this phrase. Education happens in many places and spaces, of which the classroom is but one.
That's so good.
And we're often so focused on the classroom learning, content learning, that we fail to recognize that all different forms of learning happen in all different environments. So let me give you an example. Suppose that instead of school lockers that have, number 102B and 206C and 4 or whatever, they all get named after some famous person who's accomplished a lot and whose success is to be admired. Now, I originally saw this in a medical facility that women went to when they were having the kind of tests that scare you because you don't know if you'll have cancer or some other horrible thing wrong with you. And so you're feeling uncomfortable, and people are seeing different parts of your body. So instead of the lockers in this room, changing room, being labeled A, B, C, D, or 1, 2, 3, 4, they were labeled Rosa Parks and Betty Ford and Maya Angelou, and the list went on. I actually have a beautiful graphic of it. And so when they gave you the key, they said, oh, go to Betty Ford, or go to Maya Angelou, go to Rosa Parks. And something happened, right? It was like inspiring, like, oh, I can do this. I'm going to a better place. I'm going to someone who's going to help me. And why don't we do that with kids? Why don't we put the names of amazing people on their lockers and let them associate that? So all of this is about messaging in a different way and enabling students to, in essence, curve back in to finding a pathway forward.
So good. It's a lot to take in, and it's so practical. I bet you have a million more of these ideas.
I do. I mean, this is what
and now that Laura and I have contact information, you may be in trouble.
Oh, yeah.
No, this is what I do, right?
Really?
I mean, and yeah. And part of the reason that I've been doing these sessions is because these are, I mean, I am an academic by training, and I was a college president, and I was the senior policy advisor to the U.S. Department of Education. But I get my hands very dirty, and I still teach. And so my hope is that what I do is stuff that you can literally take and deploy tomorrow. Well, I mean, it would help to have some systemic understanding and some coordination and some planning, but they're not skills that are, once you get them, you can go do them.
And you know, I think when you were talking about education happens in different ways in different places, but what you're talking about, what I'm seeing and have seen being in education the last, as it's changed, is a lot of the knowledge these kids have at their fingertips as far as facts, or as far as, you know, getting information about math or whatever. They know how to do that through technology. But these social, this psychological, these need, these coping that they're going to have to do the rest of their lives in it, to put those in place, those are essential skills that kids are going to have forever. They may know how to get that information, but if they can't cope, what are they leaving with?
And we don't measure that, by the way. We measure content learning.
Right.
Yeah. So let's get into these questions, and I'm excited to hear how we can get some more of you, more books, more articles where we can find more. And we'll have those for our listeners, because I know they're going to be as excited as I am to hear more of Karen Gross. But talk to us about some of the questions.
All right, so let me pick a few, and just to presage that a little bit. So I write about this. It's all on my website. I have a trauma book called Trauma Doesn't Stop at the School Door. The cheapest version is the ebook, actually, on Amazon. But I have downloadable PDFs on my website for how to build a trauma toolkit, how to use humor, jokes, tongue twisters, and the like, which are also a way of calming the autonomic nervous system, because trauma takes away joy. There's the Feeling Alphabet activity set, which I did with someone named Ed Wang, who's a professor at Harvard Medical School, on how to identify feelings and different ways you can help students identify feelings. So that's all on the web. And there are some videos and articles and other things there. I have to say that I'm way better in person. So if there is something else I can do for you, I do hope you'll reach out. I'm keen on helping schools. And
I can't even imagine, because you're so wonderful through this. So my goodness, I think any school that books you to come talk would be getting a treasure trove of information.
Well, they usually, I'll tell you one interesting aside, and you can cut this out of the tape if you want. I used to do what I call one-off events with schools. You know, they would ask me to speak, I'd come, and then I'd leave. And then I realized, no. This doesn't have stickiness. If you want to make this kind of change and do this kind of work, you have to keep working at it. And so now I only do it if I can speak a couple times at a school and engage every other week or every few weeks, because that way we can develop a relationship, a sense of trust, and then I can keep adding more and more ideas, and then people can reflect back in the weeks that come. How did they work? How didn't they work? And just so you know, with 3 colleagues, I founded a virtual teachers lounge that does this for teachers. And the teachers come every other week, and there are some facilitators, and they work on just these kinds of issues. And it has a private website with resources. So that's another initiative that's underway. All right.
So that's great information. I'm glad you shared that, because I do feel like when you talk about that, I just had a conversation with a couple of friends yesterday that we've had a couple of speakers come to our school, and it would be about trauma, and we would get so excited and we're going to change, but there really wasn't. Then as the weeks go on, it's not ingrained. It's like we cry, we want to do better, we're going to do better, and then the school's not making the change that we want to see. So we just had this conversation yesterday. And so what you're saying is so true. And just because I had this conversation yesterday, it really resonates with me that it needs to be more than you hear it. You've got to, I love that you're coming back and you're giving more. So well, that's intuitiveness.
The other reason is that not every place is the same. And you have to learn about a place, and you have to learn about its culture and its history. And you have to learn about where they're at. And so this isn't cookie cutter. I mean, yes, there are some things I can share with you that everybody can do and adapt. But the idea of doing quality trauma work is to understand the environment and context in which you're working. And so if you just show up, give a speech, and leave, you don't do that as engaging and as useful as it may seem at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah,
good stuff.
All right. So here's my first question out of my list of 11. There could be a much longer list, by the way. Okay. So here's my first question. Do you have a trauma team in place right now to prepare your school for the fall? And that trauma team, if the answer is no, then one ought to think about creating one. If the answer is yes, then one should think with me about what that trauma team should be doing now and what they will be doing at the start of school. So a trauma team can be composed of the school counselor, the school nurse, a teacher or two, a coach, and then probably a trauma expert from outside the school system, but not one who's inexperienced in education. It has to be, so I've been to enough disaster sites where they send a person who's never dealt with schools to deal with a school shooting. Like, no, not so smart. And you need someone who actually understands schools, understands what happens when there's a shooting, understands its impact on classrooms, on students, on graduating students, on incoming students, on parents, and the like. Okay. So this trauma team would not only themselves be trained, but they would help train all the people in the school who work with students as to some preliminaries about trauma. How do you identify it? How do you know if it's happening? What can you do with it? What should you know in terms of your own self, in terms of catching it? So it would be an educational piece. But then when school opens, they would be available in a room as a trauma team that is available. Not everyone has to be there. to help anyone who wants to get help. And maybe there's a care room for teachers and other educators, and there's a care room for kids. But for the first couple weeks of school, even if no one uses the service, it messages that we recognize that this is different than other years, that you probably have complex feelings about a variety of things, whether it's parentification that's occurred, whether that's abuse you've seen within your family, whether that's alcohol or drug addiction that you've experienced, whether you've been sad, whether you have had someone in your family die, whatever, whether you've reacted to the riots, whether you've reacted to the verdicts and the shootings, where have kids had a chance to process it? These would be places and people who could help them process that. Now, that's not the only place for it to be processed, but it's hugely important when something as big as what happens, which has been chronic trauma as opposed to acute trauma, that you need a place to process what's happened. So, by way of example, I helped reopen a school after 9/11. It was right there. The school was right there. I mean, and by the way, that was an acute incident, right? It was a limited geographic area. Some 2,000 people died. It was shocking by any measure. There were smells associated with it for months thereafter. But we set up a trauma team that actually was on site for the first 3 weeks. And you could make appointments, or you could drop in, you could do whatever you wanted. But for many of us, we would talk to students and then say, you know what? I'm happy to listen, and I share many of your feelings. But you know, I think here's the card. Go talk to these people, because they can help you even more on an ongoing basis. So I do think we need trauma teams. I think you have to ready the school for what's happening by acknowledging that kids will be coming in, and faculty and staff, with trauma, and then have a system in place to deal with it. So the first question then is, do you have a trauma team in place?
Important. This is so good. So good. And we've taught, Laura and I have already discussed this, or what team are we going to have in place? So this just kind of, I don't know, it inspires and ignites and I think it will a lot of educators. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I think many of the ideas that I proffer are ones that people have had sort of floating around in there, but they haven't been systematized, and they haven't been put into an architecture or a plan for engagement. So what this is really doing is taking ideas that many of you have. I mean, I didn't invent them totally, and taking them and putting them in a way that you can use them in a systemic and systematic way. Okay, so here's the second question. Do you have unique, different, special plans for the opening day of school, and how students are met and greeted at the doorway, and what happens to them as they walk to whatever classroom to which they've been assigned? So, what one head of school said to me, well, I'm going to put on, my shield, my thermometer, and my list. I said, what? No. You're going to wear a funny hat and a wig, and you're going to decorate your screen, and you're going to have the school mascot out there, and you're going to have 3 teachers and 3 coaches, and lots of people cheering the welcome back, or welcome to school. It's good to see you again. So there needs for the first week to be an entire team that meets and greets everybody who comes into that building. Students, bus drivers who drop people off, parents who drop students, or guardians who drop students off. so that everybody feels people really care about what's going to happen in this school now. And whether it's banners or confetti or non-latex balloons or costumes or wigs or mascots, you need something. You need music, you need food, you need all sorts of ways to celebrate a return, because one of the things that trauma takes away, among its many things it takes away, is joy, laughter, play. Those are all things that need to be reinstituted. Whether you're 5 or 15, it's okay to smile and laugh and engage and have humor, not inappropriate humor related to sexuality or the pandemic or something. But, okay, so how you do the first day and the first week really matters. And you can't just say, oh, wait, oh, school's starting tomorrow. Like, what are you doing? No. You have to plan and prepare and be ready. And it has to be age appropriate. What you do at a elementary school might not be the same as won't be the same as what you do at a middle school or a high school, for example. But you need that level of preparation to create a beginning that's welcoming and warm and engaging and messages connecting and messages that this is new and different and we're not returning to where we were, we're moving ahead.
It's like I want to redo, like I want to send all these kids home and tell them, okay, we're coming back another time because I regret not doing this. And
that's right.
Like,
You're not the first person who said, oh, God, oh, go away. I'm learning what I didn't do. Not what
I know.
No, but this is perfect for the start of the new school.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, here's an entry.
Yeah.
Right? You have an opportunity to get it right.
And this is so timely right
Yeah,
now, because
it
right
is.
now we're getting ready for next year. Right now is when we're making those plans. So we want to get this out as soon as we can, because this is what we're talking about right now, is how we're looking forward to the next year.
Mm-hmm.
So what other questions do you have? Because this is some good stuff.
All right. Well, let me give you one more. I should also say that on June 19th, I'm doing a webinar panel for Delta Kappa Gamma, which is the Women's Education Honor Society, on how to reopen schools. So that's not the same as working with your school individually, but it is an opportunity for people to hear yet again a set of ideas with different voices about what it is. I'm also teaching a course on how to create trauma-responsive institutions at Rutgers Graduate School of Social Work in their continuing education department, and I'm offering 2 courses. One is on how to create trauma-responsive institutions, whether they're schools or social work organizations or clinics or community centers. That's May 12th. And then there's one on trauma anniversaries, which is going to be a really big deal because we're hitting up against 1 year of lots of things that will have happened, including people dying and people getting ill and people getting fired and people having their marriage fall apart and all sorts of things. So we're really good at celebrating positive anniversaries. We're not so swift at dealing with, quote, negative anniversaries, whether you call them commemorations. So think about Parkland and what did they do at year 2 and year 3 to memorialize, commemorate a bad event. And it's not the same as celebrating a birthday or a wedding anniversary or something like that. So that's also at Rutgers in June. And those courses are really not expensive. I think they're $60 and they're 3 hours. And they're part of a trauma certificate program that they have. So if you just Google Karen Gross, Rutgers Graduate School of Social Work, trauma courses or something, you should pick them up. They also have a calendar. You can pick them out. So one's in
your website also, Karen? Is
yeah,
it
they're on my website too.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's a hyperlink to them there. So why don't I make the final question, not the last question in the list, but the final one for now, which has to do with space and place. So how we think about space and place messages and what we do in space and place sends significant messages. And the lockers are one example of thinking about space and use of space. So one question that's come up a lot in schools is, do we change things from the way they were before? Do we paint different colors? Do we take down what was on the walls before? Do we put up new things on the walls? Do we decorate the stairwells? Do we message on the walls? What is it that's in our space and place, and how do we message through the use of space and place? And I want to suggest two things that one can do that will literally change up space almost instantly. The first is to create a wall where students can put up Post-it notes about how, or adults, about how they're feeling and how they're doing, and anonymously. And just the idea that you can put up somewhere, big wall, by the way, an expression of how you're feeling and how you're doing is really useful. And then after the wall gets really crowded, you take a picture of it. You can turn it into laminated placemats or mugs. It's worth memorializing that we're going through a really hard time. And you're creating a work of art, right? By putting that up. I mean, there are other kinds of installation art things that one can think about, but the Renwick Museum did something similar where you took a piece of wood and you put it into this wooden church-like thing about a hope you had or a wish you had. I mean, you could do that too. And the idea is that so many people did it, it became its own work of art. Then what I suggest is that in an area of the floor, you actually take out the floor and put in a writing board on the floor with a bucket of chalk next to it. You take out the tiles, or you take out the wood, or whatever your linoleum, or whatever your floor is made out of, and you allow people to chalk as they're walking up and down the halls. And then at the end of each night, somebody can come and wipe it off and start again the next day. You need avenues for people to express themselves. You need avenues where feelings can come out non-judgmentally and in the open, and for people to see that they're not alone in whatever it is they're feeling. So when somebody writes, I'm pissed off, or I'm angry, or I don't like this, or I'm sad, there's going to be somebody else who's got that same feeling. And the other thing that works like that, if I can find one, is to create a bucket of feeling toys that you put out in a hallway. Hang on. These are emojis.
Oh, okay.
Feelings. Create a bucket of them and let kids take them. Let them carry them in their pocket. Let them put them on their desk to show their teacher how they're feeling. Let them recognize that your feelings can change over the course of a day. Recognize that feelings matter and create buckets and buckets and buckets of these. And
so those are just like, for those who are just listening, those are just like the little emojis on little foamy feeling squares, right? Is that what those are?
Yes. Yeah.
So that's really cool, and they're just about an inch.
Yeah, they're tiny. I mean, these aren't for elementary school, right? They're too small. They're bigger ones.
Yeah, that's neat.
But they have all the feelings on them.
Oh, that is really cool.
I love that.
I do too.
And can you see?
Yeah.
Yes.
That
is great.
Yeah.
Here's one last suggestion before we end. Okay. So, how to use space and place. We're not done with this topic, but just a few suggestions. So in Japan, there's a type of pottery called kintsugi, Kintsugi. It's ancient, and it is what happens in a non-discard culture. So when a plate breaks or a bowl breaks or a vase, they put it back together with gold, and then it becomes more beautiful. And they say, more beautiful for being broken. So if you want to see what that looks like, you take a plate and you break it into pieces, not too many, right? Because if you break it into too many, you'll never get it back together, but like 4 pieces. That's an art in and of itself. And then you seal it with gold, the whole plate. And then you display all your kintsugi reconstructed items in the hallway with a big sign that says, more beautiful for being broken. And everyone creates them.
Oh my goodness.
Kids, all ages, all stages. It creates an unbelievable visual of, we've been through a lot, but we will move forward with hope and with beauty. And you can see all these cracked, repaired pots, plates, bowls, cups in a big display that everybody makes and puts up.
That actually brought a tear to my eye.
I know. I'm trying to hold it together.
I'm trying to hold it together because that still, yeah.
Full of that. And just, yes. Now, yes, we're moved.
I'm very moved. I'm crying.
Well, the suggestions will help move your community, and they'll move it to a place that allows them to move forward. And at the end of the day, that's what we want, student success, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't, many people say, all this trauma responsiveness is coddling or snowflaking, and the answer is no. The goal is to help students succeed, and whatever it takes to do that, do it. It's the right thing to do.
I still can't speak.
I know. I know.
So good.
This has been wonderful. Such practical examples, such easy but meaningful things that we can do to really change the culture of the school, like what you were saying. This is going to be so helpful.
And I think the key takeaway for me is messaging. How are we messaging? And do something. You may not do everything. Do something. And you've given us some very, very practical ideas. And you are such an inspiration, and you've done doing some great and wonderful things. So we just appreciate your humility and your servitude and your attitude and helping fellow educators. We appreciate it so much.
So nice to be with you. Nice to be with your listeners.
Thank you.
Thank you for the kind words.
And I would love to extend an open door invitation to join us anytime, because this has been so incredibly valuable.
And she never says that. Oh, thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Nice to be with you.
That was amazing.
I'm blown away.
I am blown away and cried.
I'm glad you pulled yourself together. You embarrassed me.
I did embarrass myself, but if I ever get started crying, it's just like, let her finish. It's like that Christmas vacation. Better just let her get through, because it's gonna, I rarely cry, but when I do, get out of the way. So I couldn't stop. It was embarrassing, but it was such a beautiful illustration and analogy for brokenness. And gosh, I don't know. And I think you don't realize that there is that you have trauma possibly in your life until just something is said and it just,
Yeah.
it just, comes all out. So she was great.
Yeah, she was.
And gave us just enough of the questions that we want to read.
I want so much more from her.
Yeah.
So I hope she'll come back because, I mean, how many seconds into this episode were we when she's already grabbing things to use as practical, like, what's the word? I can't even think of the word.
I say rubber meets the road, but that's
okay.
Just
Practical rubber meets the road.
Ideas that you can do, and we always love that.
Yeah.
But sounds like she really, when you've been at the end of the dealing with students with trauma from 9/11, this is different, but she's been there. She's been in the trenches, and so she has some ideas about what is important. And it's things that, like she said, probably educators have already got rolling around in their head, but
yeah,
putting it down and having this resource, I think, is going to be huge. So check out her
I think
website.
in the South we say putting walking around legs on it. Taking those ideas and putting walking around legs on them.
I have heard that. If you think you just made that up, you did not.
No, I said in the South. I'm trying to.
Oh, I gotcha.
Yeah. Trying to gain my Southern card back.
So, Laura, you know that I was traveling to our beautiful shores of Alabama, which is and this is true fact. This is voted the whitest beaches in the world. In Alabama, we have the pure white sand, gorgeous. So I had been planning on this all during the pandemic. That I had not, as you know, been my grown son. We stayed, separate because of my other child with medical needs. So we decided that at this point we're all vaccinated. We're going to be together, and under the same roof. Gorgeous house at Perdido. So we're there, and I get, for the first time in my life, my wisdom teeth came in. And the doctor had just told me, you're going to have trouble. Oh, boy, did I. So I wanted to let everybody know my horrible, but I guess if you're going to have a toothache, have it there. You know what I'm saying?
So let me get this straight. You're cutting teeth, and you're older than, let's say, 18. You're older than 18 when most people get their wisdom teeth.
Okay, we'll say that. And
I'm assuming. I'm sorry if that was
an assumption that. But I'm going to read to you something that I saw. And I love the beach. Oh, it's one of my favorite places on earth. And I have been to the schooling down there that they have for teachers.
Oh yeah, Dolphin Island.
The beach, Dolphin Island.
Sorry,
Dolphin.
I didn't say dolphin. Like
a sea turtle. I'm learning. Was that better?
Not really. But go ahead.
Advice from a sea turtle: swim with the current. Be a good navigator. Stay calm under pressure. Be well traveled. Think long term. Age gracefully. Spend time at the beach. My new favorite saying.
I love it.
Obviously, you've got nothing to top that.
No, I wish you would let me lead. But
why would I start?
I was hoping your time at the beach would give you like a new appreciation for maybe letting somebody else go first every now and then.
My near-death experience with my tooth should have taught me something.
Well, while you were going through your tooth issue, I was in the middle of a thyroid storm.
Yes.
And I had to
getting stormy weather. We were under a thyroid watch.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to try to go into weather, and I was like, no, this is my turn.
I know, but it is kind of weather related. We were under a watch because I was seeing signs of a storm on the horizon.
Oh, it was a storm. And you weren't here. And I was trying to let you have your vacation. And also, the times I did try to talk to you, you were incoherent because of your tooth. So,
Yeah.
Anyway, but no, my doctor changed my thyroid medicine. I don't have a thyroid. I'm thyroidless. And she changed my medicine.
Go fund me. Go fund me.
And she changed my medicine. And just that little tweak in the medicine that I've been on for 4 years made a difference. And I was a different person. And I've got like sworn affidavits of people who can testify that my behavior was different for those couple of weeks.
It was a teary, syrupy, you were a teary, syrupy mess.
Let me tell you, I pride myself on maybe, well, you've heard us say before, if you're a long-time listener, it's nearly impossible to hurt our feelings. But for about 3 weeks, I was going around here. Everything was hurting my feelings. It was just...
And questioning everything.
Questioning.
If you get to the point where you're going, what did they mean by that?
It's
usually
awful.
We're like, if they got something to say, they'll say it straight up. Otherwise, I'm not going to guess what they mean. But yes, you almost had my thyroid messed up just by
and you almost had my teeth messed up.
I know. Thank you for the empathy. It's just that we had so much empathy for one another.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've really got it bad, don't we?
So my advice to you would be, if around this time of year, and this is a very bad time of year to have this happening. So my advice to you is, if you start crying a lot, maybe you should go have your thyroid checked.
That's true. That's true. And maybe you should brush your teeth.
Medical advice. Now we're giving medical advice.
I know. And we know that we are so blessed. We're not really complaining. We just kind of like to laugh at one another. And
once we're on the right medicine, because don't laugh at me when I'm on the wrong medicine.
Don't laugh at her until she's on the right medicine.
And I'm not even 100% yet. So it's touch and go.
Easy. Careful around Laura. All right. Thanks for listening. We hope this helped in any way today. And I think it does. I think she's a powerful speaker. And I think
Very much.
We just wanted to let our listeners know about a few things we have going on this summer. First, we are going to be doing a trauma-informed care workshop on June 5th in Winchester, Tennessee. If you live anywhere close to Winchester, Tennessee, and you want to attend this workshop, just shoot us an email at counseloraccents@gmail.com. We are also going to be speaking at ASCA, and if you're going to be at ASCA this summer, let us know. You can go onto our Facebook group, Counselor Accents Group, and let us know that you'll be attending. We would love to connect with you there. If you want us to come speak at your event, just email us at counseloraccents@gmail.com, and we would be honored and happy and so excited to come do that for you. I'm leaving you with some outtakes. This is what it's really like behind the scenes sometimes.
I'm Kim Crumbly.
Okay, stop, because I hadn't even hit record yet. You're so
I'm
eager.
Kim Crumbly.
Stop, I'm still talking.